time is linear, knowledge is exponential, and a book is a great way to memorialize that knowledge and make it accessible. And the upside for us is that, the hope is, if these ideas uh, and the principles behind them gain traction in an organization that happens to pick the phone and call us, it makes it that much easier for us to help them.
Dear friends, Kurt Derdix here. If this is your first time listening, I am so glad you found us. Today, we chatted with my dear friend, Brady Brim-DeForest, CEO of Formula.Monks, the tech services division of Media.Monks, and the first-time author of the book, Smaller is Better. In this episode, Brady and I discussed his new book and its revolutionary approach empowering small autonomous teams to spearhead targeted missions. Drawing on his personal experiences, Brady offers a practical roadmap for dismantling complex problems and achieving breakthrough solutions. So get ready to hear inspiring insights on reframing failure as a launchpad for success, and how, as leaders and innovators, we must champion this mindset and create spaces where our teams are not just allowed to fail, but supported and encouraged to do so. So, without further ado, here's Brady. Brady Brim-DeForest, it's so good to see you, buddy. You're my first repeat guest on the show.
What an honor! Thanks,
It's
Curtis.
amazing.
I'm thrilled to be popping that one for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's auspicious timing. I mean, we had this really lovely reconnection 2-3 weeks ago in LA when you were in town, and one of the things I love about the podcast, I saw that you had the new book coming out, and I called you to congratulate you and say, "Hey, why don't you come on the show?" And you're like, "Dude, I'm going to be in town next week." So it was magic, and so thank you for that. And I got to read through the book, and I am just so tickled and thrilled because it's like you're a mind reader. This is a lot of the stuff that we're kind of going through. We have the episode right before you is with Talia Jacqueline, who's on our team as a partner. And for folks in the show that have seen Billions, she's like our Wendy. And we have
Amazing.
Somebody that's there to support us as a guide. And like a lot of this stuff that you're talking about, is, kind of into the middle, into the back of the book, mission focus, radical transparency, why do we struggle to be open? The README thing is amazing. So there's just so much stuff in here that is just like so top of mind on what we're doing with the firm, with Real World. And, so lucky for us, we're small and nimble, so we can implement this. I think this gets into the challenge around the work that you've done, and so I guess without further ado, I just want to read a little bit from the book, a little passage that hit me, and was very clear, and then we're going to ask you a bunch of awesome questions. So you say in the book, it says, the book is a practical guide about how to move faster and deliver high quality outcomes inside a large organizations. In our case, we define a large organization or enterprise as a corporation, nonprofit, or government entity with more than 3,000 employees, though the principles in the book will work for smaller organizations too. The book will teach you how to deliver the outcomes in the context of a large organization using the specific mechanisms of small autonomous teams. When I read that out, it sounds sort of just kind of dry and whatever, but I mean, the content, when I read it, it just so comes to life. So I guess, without further ado, tell us about the book. Why is smaller better, and how is slower faster, Brady?
Totally. Thanks, Curtis. And you're right.
Yeah.
That is a pretty dry and academic description. Uh, and I think that is the question when you set out to write a book. You got to strike the balance between
Yeah.
the vernacular and the precise. And it's a tough thread to weave. So I'm hoping, as as you consume the book, and as others, I hope, consume the book, that this kind of feedback loop starts, because I'm working on book number 2, and not to get ahead of myself, but this being my first book, it's been really exciting to get input. So if you're watching this show, listening to it, and you happen to read the book, please send me your feedback so I can make the next one better.
Yeah, well, and forgive me because when I said it was dry, what I meant was it was dry in the context of just reading it out of context of the book. When we read it in the context of the book, it's really makes a lot of sense. And the book is I found it to be very digestible the way that you incorporate stories. And so there's a couple even clues I want to some of these people you're referencing, I might not even know who they are.
You
Uh,
probably do.
so we can get into that. Yeah. So,
Yeah. So the book, fundamentally, um, was a way to take a career's worth of knowledge that I've had the pleasure and the luck to accumulate and make it available in a way that doesn't require um, an interaction with me or my team. Because at the end of the day, there's a limit in a professional services consulting organization. There's a limit to the impact that we can have. Um, time is linear, knowledge is exponential, and a book is a great way to memorialize that knowledge and make it accessible. And the upside for us is that the hope is if these ideas and the principles behind them gain traction in an organization that happens to pick the phone and call us, it makes it that much easier for us to help them. Um, and I think the virtuous cycle here, um, for the principles in the book too ultimately is about this flywheel. Large organizations tend to concentrate resources, human and capital, but they also are the breeding ground for innovation because they tend to be places that people go to learn a tremendous amount, but then at a certain point reach a threshold of either frustration or stagnation, and they go out and they grind it out to solve problems that really are best solved with small groups of people. And so if we can inject some of this thinking into the enterprise, I think it just accelerates the pace of human ingenuity, and that's to me the higher calling here. I think when it comes to um, small teams, I think it's pretty obvious, and it goes without saying that when you've worked with a team of really high powered, high performance people, we all have at various points in our career, you reach this point of flow where the outcome, the productivity, the quality of what you're able to produce for that team really excels beyond the boundaries of what you thought was possible. And that inflection point, and that kind of riding that wave is for me the most exciting part about building a business. And if you take the small team's approach that's outlined in the book and you apply it in the enterprise, you can capture that same kind of velocity, that same kind of experience. And I think that's what the book's all about. How do you inject those ideals, those philosophies, those principles into organizations that sometimes struggle with finding the balance between system, structure, and process, and high speed innovation, ingenuity, and high performance.
yeah, I love that. I worked in some large organizations, Esri being one. I think we had 5,500 employees in the US and a global distributor network, 180 countries with another, 5,000+. And I interfaced across, had a very, you talk a lot about cross-functional teams, and we had a very cross-functional kind of function inside of the group. And we got so much done. And Jack, the CEO, used to tell me, that he just loved how quickly we worked and, how fast we were and how nimble. But we had a small team. It was Miles Sutherland and Katie Decker. And there's we had some folks that were supporting us overseas. And there's about 7, 8 of us. And, we kind of, we just crushed it as far as how much we got done, working nimble in a lot of the ways in the book. And, it was interesting too, because I think a lot of other teams were really inspired by our productivity. And I think we also helped people to kind of raise the bar, and but not in a way that was pejorative or preachy. It just was you just start setting the pace. And, there's,
It's it changes truly. I mean,
Yeah.
that feeling, we talk about that a bit in the book. It infects people because it's exciting. It unlocks the the boundaries of what you thought were possible inside of an organization that might on any given day feel stagnant, might feel slow and
Hmm.
where there's high friction.
Yeah.
And when you start to see that what small teams can do inside those environments, it tends to spread laterally, horizontally really well.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my mentors, Duke Stump, he's been on the show, episode 50. He has a couple of pithy sayings. He's a poet. He has this idea of you can't create the magic, but you can create the conditions for the magic. And in that same breath,
Absolutely.
he has a lovely idea inspired from Buckminster Fuller called the trim tab. And the trim tab is the rudder on the plane, or it's the trim on the wing. And it's the mechanism that has the littlest bit of, it's high leverage, little effort, high impact. And I think that's what is really the kind of core nutshell of the idea of the book is to, there's an efficiency with that, the smaller configuration. So the trim tab came to mind a bunch reading it. And, you talk about, I was just going to go down a list of notes I had. You talked about autonomy as the ideal structure. That really resonates with me. I'm an independent person. But how do you balance that with the positive things that come with teamwork? And talk to us about the network diagram in the book, where there's the non-linear nature and the problem that are inherent to more nodes or people in a network or a team.
I think autonomy doesn't just mean at the edge, although I think that's where where most organizations need to focus enabling it. But autonomy is a way of efficiency and decision making. The closer you are to the higher density information, the more effective your decisions will be. As you start to abstract and move decision making up the stack in the organization, you tend to create a lot of churn where decisions now require a tremendous amount of information and data to be transplanted across the org. And in the process, you disempower the people who are right there in the thick of it, who have the ability to actually drive change in
Mm,
real time. So you slow
yeah.
things down.
Yeah.
So autonomy, I think, is a fundamentally it's a mindset.
Yes.
It's about delegation. It's about ensuring that responsibility and authority are matched.
Hmm.
In an organization where you're responsible for somebody, you don't have the authority to actually make decisions. You have no autonomy. You're not empowered. And pairing those two together is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I've been
The
obsessed. I've been what comes to mind is these Ken Burns documentaries I've been watching lately. I watched, I just watched the Vietnam, World War II, and now I'm watching Civil War. Have you ever watched any of these?
I have
Yeah,
brilliant
they're
filmmaker.
incredible, and there's a real common theme about just these commanders and generals that are successful seem to they take that autonomous view, or they empower the people in the field to be able to um, be spontaneous. And General Patton's famous phrase was something around like, all your plans go out the window when the first bullet gets shot. Right? There's something, and one of the things I learned working at Esri for Jack Dangermond was this really powerful idea that the map is not the terrain, and that it's this idea that a model is an inherently just an abstraction, and it's easy to kind of fall in love with your idea, your model, and then in academic terms, but it doesn't work in the wild. And I think that kind of really is a great segue into this idea that was kind of new to me, but it makes a lot of sense, where you kind of talked about failure at the smallest increment, and some notes about this idea of failure at the smallest increment. I am assuming that failure, what you're saying is that failure is a given in a large organization. And so in that context, it makes sense. And Back to this Ken Burns thing, there was a story I heard last night watching it where General George McClellan, U.S. General, Union General, was notoriously risk adverse and slow to attack, even though he had larger regiment sizes. And at one point in the story, he goes up, the Union Army hits a relatively small stream, and he's sitting there contemplating, wondering how deep it is while everybody's waiting. And a young Colonel Custard comes out in his horse and rides out and halfway into the stream and says, "This is how deep it is, General."
That's exactly right.
It's a
There,
great
there.
story. So I guess
I
talk to
love
us a little
that.
bit about failure at the smallest increment.
Yeah, I think failure is the necessary ingredient for success. And there's a lot of folks who have opined on this philosophically and practically, and I think there's a good body of academic literature about this too. But I think socially we still struggle, especially in large organizations, but I think small ones too, with the idea that failure is the point, right? Like success is there's not a direct path to it. None of us can accurately predict the outcomes
Yes.
of any hypothesis that we're testing. So the only way to proceed is you have to take the risk. Risk comes
Mhm.
along with failure. Increasing the speed at which you fail is the critical path to is the critical and necessary requirement to succeed. If you do it slowly, or you don't do it enough, or you don't do it in my opinion, in parallel, um, meaning that you're taking risks in many different places in the organization as opposed to attempting to sequence them, you're not going to get to the finish line fast enough. And other nimbler, more adaptable organizations will. I think we have this. Perhaps it comes from a natural human fear of failure, or maybe it's institutionalized in the educational system. I won't gesticulate wildly on that point, but I think we do see failure as a negative thing, and I think we need to change our mindsets in the organizations where we work to embrace failure as the whole point. you
Yeah.
you you
And I
will
think that's,
never reach the
mhm.
upside if you don't stumble along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I love that. We had a lovely coffee yesterday in Ojai with a new friend of mine, Chris Miller, who co-founded Viore. And they're, gearing up for a big, some big news, and they're kind of everywhere, on the verge of being an iconic brand. And he's a former pro skater and guy, has just done a bunch of awesome projects and companies. And there's a great video on the Viore site about him talking about how risk is the path to success. And in the context of him with a skateboarder and
Hallelujah.
all. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, we could get into a whole discussion about that, but there's so much more that we want to get into. But yeah, I do feel the thing, the connecting the thought I just made about Chris and what you just said is the larger thing. I would agree in society, but ironically, the part of our society or market that is really thriving is technology in the tech sector, where the sort of celebration of failure is almost like, um, I mean, it's almost like a joke. It's almost like a
Yep.
parody, like these guys are just failing forward. And, I mean, I guess in some case, I feel like that to a certain degree.
I
But,
think we
but
all
I
I think we all do, and I think that you're right. It's kind of been memeified, which to me cheapens the lesson. But
yes.
but when you and anyone that works inside of a large scale enterprise, knows this. Enterprises don't deal particularly well with deviation from the plan. Especially a public listed, or listed company, quarterly results are the gospel. You forecast your numbers and you hit them, and
Yeah.
when you don't, the markets react. Um, but that is not a great way to drive innovation, to address disruption, to actually create value. It's a great steady state, but it doesn't get you over the hump of what's to come next. And I
Mhm.
think there's a way to balance those two realities. It requires and it's a really small tweak, but you've got to make sure that some of the parts equal greater than the whole at the end of the day, right? And if you can structure your organization in that way, then you can actually leverage failure, and you can encourage it, and you can embrace it as a tool. Um, there are so many examples, in the history books of organizations that struggle with that. They reach a tipping point where, they started, as all companies do, as an idea and a dream, and with the grit and determination of an entrepreneur or a group of entrepreneurs. But most organizations reach at some point in their journey this climax where it's just downhill. I mean, no
Yeah,
company lasts forever, with the exception of maybe a couple Japanese ryokans that have been, around for 800 years.
yeah,
but no company, every company is going to at some point right off into the sunset. It will reach its demise. The question is, do you know that you're on the downward slope of your trajectory? And most organizations can't see that,
yeah,
and it's a really terrifying thing to contemplate. But you have to have that thought exercise, and you got to look, at where your culture has shifted and what the impacts of the way that you actually embrace failure will have on your ability to compete.
yeah, yeah. And there's that classic, what is the sinoid curve, where you hit the bottom and you kind of the curve, you kind of got to start a new S curve up, right? And
Yep,
that's what you're in support of here, is getting the next S curve going.
exactly.
Some of the things that uh, there's a quote here that I that resonated. I made a note on. He said, "Large organizations often forget how constrained resources can be beneficial. Constrained resources being like a startup mindset, where you're capital constrained, or human capital constrained. How this can be beneficial because they're abstracted from the impact of their decisions. By uniting responsibility with the day-to-day decisions, the enterprise can return to being nimble." Yesterday, we were up in Ojai. My partner Justin and I, we had lunch with Duke Stump, my advisor, and we were reminiscing about our time at Lime. And he talked about, I mean, it was incredible. Fastest company to 100 million in revenue. We did it in like 15 months. And the amount of money capital coming at us was just insane. And he was telling the story about, he was in an executive board meeting, and there was a mistake made with the order of the scooters. They ordered the last batch. They didn't order the new ones. It was a $50 million mistake.
Ooh.
And the COO, they all, are like calling him out, like, "Hey, you were the one that signed off." And somebody's like, "Yeah, there was an email that went out," and the CEO or the COO was like, who's in charge of ops, was like, "I get a lot of emails, basically saying that he doesn't read everything." And Duke was saying, in any other org, heads would have rolled. That guy would have been fired. The person that sent the email that didn't get a confirmation and put the order in would have got fired. But in the context of just how easy the money was at Lime in a ZERP environment and everything like that, it just kind of glossed over. And yeah, I mean, I guess that's the way it goes when you just start the waste that happens. You talk a lot about waste in the book, and how you can use waste as a product, as a positive too. Any sort of thoughts about this?
Yeah, I think waste is also a critical ingredient in the recipe. I think a lot of organizations attempt to eliminate it, but waste is actually the byproduct of experimentation. Now, there's good waste and bad waste. Bad waste
Mm-hmm.
is, fraud, people stealing from you, that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. Not good. But
Yeah.
but you know, Apple's a great example. They spent billions of dollars building the Apple car, and they shelved
Mhm.
it, right?
Yeah.
That is a tremendous amount of waste. But it would have been more wasteful to take that product to market, not believing that it
Yeah.
actually would find
Yeah.
traction. That
Yeah.
would have
Yeah.
been
Well, you talk a
tremendously
lot about
wasteful.
bias. You talk a lot about bias in the book, and that'd be an example of sunk cost fallacy.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, and we all have it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like a base human
Yeah.
reaction, right? You spend time, energy, money on
Yeah.
something, and
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
makes every further dollar you invest that much easier.
Mm.
Um, and you can fall down into that trap quite quickly. But I think zooming back out, the idea of waste as a necessary ingredient, but also a something to be kind of celebrated because it, especially if you're still able to achieve the margin target that you set out for a particular product or line of business. Um, it's a necessary part of delivering the outcome, and trying to eliminate every last bit of waste. There's a diminishing return at a certain point, and there's always the question of thresholds, and how to walk that line just so. But trying to destigmatize waste, I think, is really important if you're going to recapture that kind of organizational velocity and momentum.
Yeah, when I was at Esri, Jack, the CEO, he would often have, it wasn't the norm, but it was not unusual to have competing teams working on the same stuff
Absolutely.
independently, and you would create competition. It would also create different patterns and ways of thinking. It would defend against groupthink. And he's privately held, so he can sort of march to his own beat, and he's not having to have to deal with a public quarterly guidance to public markets. So,
Yep.
You had written a little bit about some of that stuff in the book. Any sort of thoughts about any of this?
Yeah, I think that you have to start with baking it into the model,
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally. I think a lot of the things that you do as a startup or as a growth stage company, um, to protect the bottom line, can end up getting you into a lot of trouble once you go public, because um, the reality that you're playing in has shifted. I think a good example is below market compensation, which is great and attractive early on if you can retain talent.
Yeah. Yep.
But at a certain point, it actually you're literally boosting your bottom line in a way that makes it difficult to compete, because you're hiding the true cost of delivering your service to market.
Yeah.
Um, and that's a really challenging moment for a lot of organizations to shift through, because what was once a competitive advantage now becomes a ball and chain that's holding you back, that's making it difficult to
Mm.
all talent has a lifespan.
Yep.
And when you start to see the churn and the attrition,
Mm.
post IPO, um, and you're trying to replace top tier talent, and they're 3 or 4x the cost, you have a problem. Now your margin
Yeah.
profile is going to shift. So, so,
Yeah.
so that proactive planning around those moments in time, and addressing that reality before it hits you, blindsides you, super critical.
Yeah. I
Just
love that.
easy to get addicted to the really efficient model, but
Mm.
also really easy to ignore why it exists in the first place.
Yeah, that's a great insight. I mean, that's such subtlety. It's I guess that in that example, that's a form of leverage, and leverage is great when it works for you, and it's equally painful when it works against you. And I think even in the accounting treatment, it's there's no real other than goodwill in a transaction. There's really no way to value the human capital. It's an intangible that's just not reflected on the balance sheet, which I think is kind of problematic in accounting personally. um,
Totally. Especially in a technology business and a professional services business, anything, really anywhere in the knowledge ecosystem, your human capital is your most valuable asset, and
yeah.
very little time and energy spent into actually, it's seen as replaceable and
Yeah.
fungible, and it's just simply not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we should write FASB and all those guys and be some of the results you've seen doing smaller is better philosophy is increased productivity, decrease risk, decrease management overhead, better collaboration, innovation, money, better bottom line, probably better, more, or maybe in this context could be quality of margin. I would imagine it's probably something around that. And the best of all, if you handle the switch yourself, the small autonomous teams model doesn't require any special tools or money. You don't need additional headcount. The only real cost is the work time spent transitioning. And to be frank, you say the shift in structure can represent a major but temporary loss of productivity. So, yeah, I mean, there's so much more I want to get into. So, you talk about the teams model. Like, this is a big section in the book. You talk about how teams model reduces bias. What is the teams model? Why is it cross functional for the win? And how do we mine for more cross functional perspectives?
All super good questions. So fundamentally, the teams model begins with this notion that smaller is better. You've got to decompose the monoliths in your organization, and you may have a large scale initiative that is dozens or hundreds of individuals working towards a single mission. And step number one is taking and decomposing that mission into individual, and they can stack upwards like in a waterfall OKR. A lot of different ways to skin that cat, but the fundamental and necessary ingredient here is reducing the work down to a size, to chunks that can be uh, accomplishable by 3 to 8 people. Um, as team sizes start to grow larger than that, the interpersonal relationships, the friction, the overhead starts to increase uh, substantially and outpace the benefits of the velocity that you hope to achieve by growing your team. And it's a common problem that we see in software development. And there's a great literature out there like the Mythical Man Month. Um,
But what is it? A book?
yeah, it's a book. Yeah, yeah,
What,
yep,
what,
yeah.
what,
It's
what say the title again, Brady?
the Mythical Man Month. It's old school. I think it was written in the '90s or maybe even the '80s. It has a great narrative about an early uh, um, uh, mass massive ERP project at General Motors, and it it's a really classical um, example of the complexity of traditional, or maybe even um, basic rational thought about how to move faster. You think, I'm going to pour more fuel in the fire. You mash the
Yep.
pedal, you deploy more resources, but you reach this point of diminishing returns exceedingly quickly. And what's fascinating is even 30, 40 years after this book was written, and it's literally required reading in almost every computer science curriculum. Um, IT managers, all the way up to VPs, SVPs, CIOs, CTOs, still fall into the trap. They want to go faster, so it means more bodies. And what you actually see in reality is the exact inverse happens. You start to slow things down, and it happens in insidious little ways. You may get a boost of productivity, but the flip side is you actually make it impossible for the great people, the 10Xers on your team that can
Mm-hmm.
have outsized impact, and
Mm-hmm.
that are the ones that frankly were probably there at the beginning and helped your organization to develop a competitive advantage. Those people walk because
Yeah.
working in an environment where every decision requires a committee, requires 10 meetings, disempowers the exceptional creators. And that reality, that team size does not actually have a one-to-one correlation with velocity, is just so challenging for most people to understand. Even folks who have read the book have bought into the vision, have even grown up in the startup ecosystem. Something, some switch flips when you get into a larger organization where the complexity of managing a large team um, with complex requirements and with dozens of external stakeholders, um, every problem starts to look like a nail, and all you've got is this hammer of scale. And so you just pour more bodies.
Just to clarify, the book, The Mythical Man Month, is referred to as the Bible software, excuse me, the Bible of software engineering, published by Fred Brooks, first in 75. And it's just, yeah, I'm just reading the wiki page. And yeah, it's talking about this, like the idea that it's essentially it's saying that there's a unit of productivity per person, and that if they had this one project that they were coding on, it would require 6 months to get it done, regardless of the number of people on the project. Right. So
Exactly.
that's great. Yeah. The Well, this is great. I'm gonna have to check this book out, the Mythical Man Month. It's one of the things I love about doing a show. I learn all this great stuff. The next part of the question in the teams was why cross functional teams? How do you define cross functional? What is that? Why is it for the win? And how do you mind for these cross functional perspectives?
So I think that the real value in cross functional is that you have unbounded thinking, and it encourages first principles reasoning too. Because if you take the expertise out of the equation, and you deploy really solid thinking, the way that you look at and shape a problem and a solution completely changes, because you approach the challenge that you're addressing with a childlike mind, and it's really easy when you have a deep body of knowledge, a deep expertise, to make 1,000 assumptions, because that's what you're good at, right? You have this body of knowledge, you have the wisdom and the experience, and so you pattern match. You walk in and you come to a conclusion based on the surface level.
Yeah.
Um, and when you take folks out of the environment where they're comfortable and you deploy them into one that they don't have that same level of expertise in, but they still have the patterns and the pattern matching capability, just from a different domain perspective, magic happens. You're looking at building a cross-functional team. You really want to not only be cross-functional horizontally, but you want to be cross-functional from a domain expertise perspective too. One of my favorite things to do is take folks from as an example, automotive engineers, and deploy them in solving a medical device problem. And the solutions they come up with are just like something that no one in the medical device ecosystem would ever think of, because their entire frame of reference has shifted. Um, then there's the added benefit of addressing organizational blockers too. So, in many cases, in an organization that has mature functions around legal and HR, compliance and risk management, marketing, sales, all of these functions in the organization have established bodies of knowledge. They have dogma. They have a way of working that tends to fixate on the thing that they know and do best. Um, and so when you're building or making something from scratch,
Yep.
these functions tend to be gatekeepers. And it's unintentional in most cases, but the relationship that's established, um, pits these functions, the builders and the gatekeepers, the risk managers, it puts them at odds, pits them against each other. And if you take and extract, let's say, into your small cross-functional team, a lawyer and a salesperson and a marketer, and you have all of the necessary ingredients to actually take your product, the thing that you're building, the service you're developing, to market without anybody else's help in the organization. Now you're focusing all of those phenomenal experts on a single outcome, a single mission. And again, magic happens, because all of a sudden the way that those experts are focusing their capabilities, their expertise on solving this problem, shifts from a risk mitigation perspective to an outcome oriented perspective. How can I deliver value? How can I help this team be successful? And if it's the only thing, the solutions they come up with, the creativity they apply, is just mind blowing. Focus is such a critical part of the recipe If you take someone and you expect them to work across 10 different work streams, the way the human mind works is not linear. You don't get your best thinking uh, on a consistent basis, right? It doesn't just show up from 9 to 5. You may have a brilliant idea at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night, and if you've got 10 different priorities and you're expected to make progress in all of them, it's like a game of roulette where that brilliance is actually going to be applied. But if you take and you strip all that away and you say you've got one thing that is important for you to work on, everything else off the table, now you're concentrating that brain power across the entire cross-functional team, and
Yeah.
you get better results just fundamentally.
Yeah. And then that feedback loop and failure, probably there's probably, yeah, what I'm kind of stumbling for my words, but I'm just like thinking about how the feedback loop in the context of failure and all that sort of stuff would probably just be kind of streamlined and much more efficient. And I think that gets into a great kind of bit about what you talk around radical transparency and being mission focused, and to be able to create an environment where people can trust each other enough to quote unquote play and see if something, it's like in music, you hit a bad note. There was this great story where like it was it was Miles Davis, and it was like that great band doing Kind of Blue, and it was I can't remember which band member it was, but it was Charlie Parker.
Hmm.
Charlie Parker hits a what is quote unquote a wrong note, and then Miles Davis just kind of sits back and looks, and I guess he like responded with a note that made the wrong note right,
Totally,
you know?
totally.
And I just get so jazzed, all the pun intended, about that kind of story. And I think that's what happens with these teams. And you could build this transparency, and there's a play to it, and and it's like people, it's a freedom to fail, because you know what? That's where that sort of improvision and the ensemble happens, and all that sort of bit.
Absolutely. Kim Scott wrote a really great book called Radical Candor, which was really inspirational to us uh, on our journey internally when we first kind of made the pivot into the radical transparency model. And it's really hard to imagine just the real depth of alignment that it brings. On the
Mm-hmm.
surface level, it sounds great, right? We're going to share everything with everyone, and of course, there's also some anxieties that come along with it. But when it gets down, when you get down to brass tacks, what it actually does is act like this massive force multiplier for your organization, because when the information is essentially democratized, you're leveraging all of your human capital, and you're allowing that wrong note to be turned into a right note because you can catch each other, right? Someone can see some. We've all got blinders on to a certain degree. We all could be looking at the exact same information and come to totally different conclusions, but that only happens if we all are looking at that same set of data. And many organizations silo the information to such a degree that you blind each other, and you make it impossible to actually come up with that right note, or that last minute assist to get something over the finish line. And I think there's a natural tendency to be afraid of the unknown. If we put this information that we see as proprietary, confidential, or risky in the hands
Mm-hmm.
of our frontline folks, terrible things will happen. But it just it doesn't play out that way. Um, uh, it engenders trust, and it builds confidence, and it also makes people vulnerable with each other. And vulnerability is such a powerful medicine. Um, it always shocks me, um, because I think my natural default as a human is to silo information and compartmentalize things. And the people that I've had the I've been lucky enough to work with, who have this certain magic ability to just be themselves and just be completely vulnerable all of the time. are the ones that have this tremendous capacity to bring out the best in people, because it gets people to lean in, and suddenly they can see themselves in the person on the other side of the table, and they see, for their flaws and all, and they invest in a way that when you're guarded, when you have layers, um, uh, or up, that isolate you from those deep human connections, you just can't make the kind of progress that you otherwise do as an individual or as a team.
Yeah, amen to that. Well, that's really part and parcel to the show. It's the melody of the show is unique perspective shaping the world. It's people like you, and then the counter melody is humanizing success. And it's this idea of being vulnerable about things, sharing publicly. And you came on the last episode. For folks that didn't hear, you were candid about some things that for you, and I do really believe that. And Talia has really helped me on our team recently in the last couple weeks, actually, completely have a transformation on how I perceive the world. I feel like it's such a transformation, in fact, that like, like when we were kids, you have the negatives, and they were kind of the opposite, black and white, and then the film gets developed in its beautiful color. And for me, I've had this incredible opportunity to dissolve my ego and be less self-absorbed by when people are maybe being critical or upset and they're talking to me, that I'm like, you know what, like whether it's a colleague or my wife, that I realize, you know what, I can listen from a place of empathy now to sort of hear around what their emotional fear or their need might be, and not get triggered or not be reactive, and just be responsive and have empathy for what it is they need. If somebody's like, upset with me, and, they're saying, you always do this, I don't have to like be fact based like most men typically are, and be like, what do you mean you always, like by what percent? I could be like, maybe what she's saying is like, right now I need this, and like listen to the deeper meaning. And it's like, even right now, I feel like I'm just inhaling, taking a deep breath, and exhaling, and I just feel like it's such a relief is a great word for me, to be able to just like not have to be so self-absorbed that it's all about, that somebody's upset with me, but they get to have their own experience. And as I'm having this experience with this, I'm realizing that, that's actually a more mature and sophisticated way to be. And a lot of us still aren't there yet. And so I can sort of help encourage that pattern by practicing what I'm preaching right now, and doing and being that, and being more empathetic. And I think it's really hard to do, and probably in a corporate setting when there's high stakes, and you got like even like in your guys' case, where you were telling me about how many organizations were merged in the kind of the roll up, and you have people who have earnouts and a lot of high stakes stuff, and it's like there's easy said, hard to do. And I really do feel like your book does a great job of sort of moving the ball forward with some of these ideas. So, one of the things that got me really excited was your README idea. And it's so funny because I heard somebody talking about that somewhere else. And I was telling Talia, like, that'd be such a cool thing for us to do, where everybody has sort of like their personal little, preferences. And, these are the things, this is kind of how I'm wired. And this is like what gets under my skin. And that was such a cool little thing. And tell us a little bit about that, because I thought it was such a great idea.
Yeah. I think that it's, like most great ideas, it definitely didn't originate here. Um, but software developers have been using READMEs, in inside of repos for forever, right? And so it really came from software. The idea that when you open up, an app, and you don't, the source code, and you're not familiar with it, the first place you go is the README.
Yeah. It
Try to
gives
get an
you the
understanding.
context. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you apply that thinking to humans, and especially the idea that we should be, vulnerable to each other, let's, be clear about our preferences. Let's be clear about the things that we're good at, the things that we're bad at. Maybe you're you tend towards being monochronic, and or maybe you tend towards being polychronic. Just put it out there. That way, people, some people get really offended when I'm late, right?
Yeah.
I open up all my relationship with the disclosure. I struggle with being late. It's I'm not doing it to hurt your feelings.
Yeah.
I would like to not be late, and I'm working on making it better. So call me out. Tell me when it's upsetting to you, and that will actually help me improve.
Yeah. It's like reading the ingredients on the back of the carton.
Yeah, totally, totally. Yeah, yeah. Just put it out there. Transparency. It's
Yeah.
magical. It really is.
Have you guys been using the READMEs in the org?
Yeah, absolutely. We're
Yeah.
gradually trying to spread them horizontally elsewhere in the bigger ecosystem.
Yeah.
Um, uh, which, yeah, I'm convinced we'll eventually get over the hurdle there. I think there's a natural inclination for people to just kind of whitewash them. So I
Yeah.
really like to push people to just put it all out there, and
Yeah.
let's talk about, we're all humans, we're all imperfect,
Yeah.
and it's a great gateway into the idea that feedback and a culture designed to celebrate feedback as an investment generates amazing returns.
Mhm.
Feedback, shouldn't be a punitive thing. And so I think a README is a great way to start with that moment of like self-reflection. I'm going to give myself some feedback, and I'm going to
Mhm.
be, vulnerable and transparent with the people around me about the areas that I seek to improve.
Yeah, for the context, it's the READMEs. It's kind of hard to describe a little bit over of the voice on the podcast here, but when you see it, it's really cool. It's almost like a baseball card of like, this is the person, the player, and this is kind of their thing, preferences and things like that, and skills. What just kind of wrapping up? What does your README read like?
Yeah, it's a good question. So my README is all about how you get the best out of me. So
Hmm.
it's designed to help people with my API. Right. So it's like, this is how I consume information. These are the channels that that are going to get through to me the quickest. If you need something urgently,
Your preferences.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So and also, how to interpret my behavior.
Hmm.
So, if you're not hearing back from me, I probably didn't see your message. Please bump it. Don't be offended. Like don't think that you're bothering me. You can bump it 1,000 times. That you're helping me.
Hmm.
you know, don't be gun shy about giving me feedback if the way that I'm acting is having an adverse impact on your motivation or your emotional state.
Hmm.
And then I also talk a lot about what I spend my time doing, because in my role, I think sometimes it's very opaque. What exactly is the job of a CEO? Well, every CEO has a different job in every organization, and I try to spend a considerable amount of time in the README addressing what my day looks like, and I think that's been really powerful as a way to kind of contextualize what I'm up to, and uh, and also help people to interpret. When I show up randomly in a meeting on a Tuesday, it's not because I'm here to investigate or inspect. It's because I'm trying to learn. So it helps to contextualize my
Yeah.
behavior in that way too, which I found to be particularly valuable.
Yeah. I just find the whole thing to be so empathetic. It
Yeah.
generates and it breeds empathy on both sides, and it makes it more human, personalized, and it's just a really, really, really smart and human tool. Brady, bravo. Smaller is better. I'm a believer. I'm so excited that I get to have such an intimate conversation with you and do my little part to get these ideas out. The world's a better place for you and for the book. So excited about sharing this with my audience, and there's even some folks that really need to that I want to try to help you get the word out. So I'll be sending this along with some personal
Thank
notes.
you, Kurt.
Yeah, and I'm so excited to see what's on deck, and I'm so thrilled that we got to reconnect. And I thank you so much for sharing with our audience these amazing ideas. And if people want to get a hold of the book, tell up where's a good place to get a hold of it. And if people want to get in touch with you, or kind of share stories, or how they're using it, or learn how you guys might be able to help their org, what's the good channels for all that?
Absolutely. Smallerbetter.com, SMALLERBETTER.com is the book, so you can get access to some of the supplementary material that comes along with the book. You can download a free chapter, and you can find out the easiest way to consume your book and the book in your preferred format: Audible, ebook, uh, 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 printed copy. You can check out my website, brim-deforest.com. And finally, if you want help implementing the system inside your org, come to us at Formula.Monks, Formula.co, and we'll connect you with the right experts on our team to help you navigate the ideas in the book and implement them in your org. Curdy, I really appreciate the time and the opportunity. I always enjoy these conversations. Reminds me every time that I see your latest episode pop up of the first episode that we did together, which I thoroughly enjoyed. So it's a pleasure to be back, and especially to have the opportunity to learn with you, because every time I engage with you, and whether it's here in this venue or elsewhere, you're an inspiration. And
Oh,
uh,
yeah, thanks,
and and
man.
I, and I always walk away with a list of things that I'm going to go dig into next. So thank you for
Yeah.
the homework.
Yeah, awesome. Well, like recognizes like, and for the audience, episode 30 of the Cardi D Show with Brady, the reluctantly willing CEO, is really great. And if you like what you're hearing, and yeah, to have a wonderful weekend, and we'll stay close, amigo.
You too. Thanks, Cody.
Thanks again to Brady Brim-DeForest for being our guest. And I encourage everyone to order his book, Smaller is Better, and share it with colleagues and organizations you think would benefit from his timely message. I'm at Curdy D on Twitter and Instagram, and Kurt Deredix at LinkedIn. If the content moved you, please do review. It helps move the needle. And until next time, Curdy D loves you.